I'll start by acknowledging the country where I'm speaking from. I'm in Gadigal Wangal country of the Eora Nation, close to the Cooks River in South Sydney, also East Darawal country. So I'd like to pay respects to the traditional owners and knowledge holders and elders of this country where I live and work, since I haven't been in Parramatta for about 18 months now, maybe same as some of you. You're most welcome to put in the chat if you want to acknowledge the countries where you are speaking from or joining from. And I thought that this would be the format of the workshop today. I hope that's okay with everyone. So for the first part, I like to offer a presentation about stories of multimodal research. I'm a little bit skeptical about the term multimodality, so I chose it because I want us to look critically at a new word that is coming out, particularly from North America and Europe, that I think has some issues. So I'll talk about stories, and by stories I mean my experience working across multiple modes of research, including mostly film, but also installation and sound. So I wanted to share some of those stories about my research trajectory since undergraduate to now. I won't bore you to death with every little detail, but there's a pathway there. I would like to then open up for conversation and to hear about you and a bit more about the projects that you're doing and how you're integrating practice-based or multimodal forms in your research. And then we can take a break to stretch the legs. And then I'll come back and press a little bit on the concepts of multimodal research for about 20 minutes and then open up for conversation before we end. So I should let you go around 3:45. Depending on how many curves we take in the road. It could be a little bit tipsy, depending on where we go. You never know with a story. That's why I like stories, because you don't know where they take you. Before we start, I know many of you, but not all of you. So it'd be nice if you can, and maybe you all know each other, maybe not, but if I could briefly ask you to introduce yourselves and what is the topic of your research, that would be really nice. So do you want to start, Jan?
Hi, can you hear us? Hi, hello, can you hear me? Yeah, I'm Juan, and I am the second year PhD candidate in ICS, and my research is focused on transnational migration among Chinese and Australian youth, especially focused on their intergenerational relationship between their parents, their grandparents, and how this relationship influence their transition to adulthood or their mobility between these two countries. Yeah, and I'm the assistant for today's workshop. Yeah.
Great, Jan, thank you. Kathy Newton.
I've just submitted my PhD and waiting for feedback. My research is the impact of motherhood on the careers of policewomen. I was a policewoman for 20 years, and I'm interested, wondering what I'll do from here, and this sort of attracted me. So that's why I joined this workshop to find out more, Okay,
so thank you for your interest, Kathy. I appreciate that. Robert?
Hello, everybody. I'm down in Canberra, and I'm doing a DCA, a Doctorate of Creative Arts. I am a filmmaker, and I am looking at cinema of planetary regard, which I'm grandly calling the name of my thesis, and how cinema has relates to how we conceive the future, in particular the anxieties around the Anthropocene. And I'm setting out to make a film looking at this. So yes, it's all in front of me. I'm very keen in experimental ethnographies, and I have a long interest.
Thank you, Rob. And Yinghua?
Hi, I'm Yinghua. I'm a third-year PhD at ICS. I'm studying Chinese female professionals over here in Australia, looking at the experience at work, their career choice, and also the work-life balance. Thank you.
Thank you, Yinghua. And I'm just following how you appear in my screen. Therese?
Hi, Therese. I think you are on mute.
I was too. I just started my thesis in August, and I'm looking at older women who are in unstable housing. So they're not roofless, but they're in very precarious housing situations. And I'm looking through there's a lot of online groups that they form to communicate together and to throw ideas around about how they'd like their futures to look. And so that was my interest in the multimodal anthropologies, because I'm coming at it anthropologically, and I'm looking at this social media side of things as sort of where I'm doing my participant observation.
Excellent.
Doing interviews too, but
thank you. Boya?
Hello, everyone. I'm Boya, and I'm a new PhD student in ICS starting from September. And my thesis will focus on Chinese-born young migrations in Sydney. And I want to look at their national identity and their civic engagement, and how their civic engagement influenced their national identity, and how the national identity influenced their civic engagement in Sydney. I'm interested in this topic because I would do ethnography research as well. Particularly, I will focus on media, how the Chinese young people use social media in Sydney and how they engage through social media.
Right. Thank you, Boya, and
Thank
welcome
you.
to the ICS. Michelle?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm a first-year PhD student. I'm working on Disney and plastics, the relationship between the two, and how Disney may influence guests at the theme parks in how they use plastic, and how they might change and shape their use and disposal of plastic items.
Thank you, Michelle, and welcome also. Subkani?
Hello, glad to see you, Prof. Salazar, and also glad to see you all, everybody. I am Devi. I'm researching on Muslim pilgrimage from the perspective of Sufi or Islamic mysticism. So I'm looking for the value and also the view of this of one particular group in Indonesia, how they perceive the center of Islam as also this the place of Sufi masters and Sufi figures deliberate their value, and how this group also estimated Java as one of the center of Sufi master. So I'm looking for the relationship between Mecca as a center and also their perception about Java as also a center. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And last but not least, Merhaba Oznur.
Hola. Hi, everyone. I'm Öznur. I actually graduated from ICS last June. I'm looking at the special implications of gender and politics in Istanbul in my thesis. And I'm interested in creative research practices for my future projects. Yeah, thank you.
Excellent. So it's never easy to plan a workshop or a talk without knowing, who is listening and participating. So I hope I had pitched it in the right way. So let's see how we go. So let's get started. And as I said, this workshop is in part about how in recent years there's been a burgeoning interest in multimodal research, particularly in anthropology, but not only. And these have been mainly sparked by debates in a journal, the American Anthropologist Journal, and has been taken up in Europe, in the Netherlands, in the UK, in other parts. But as we go along, I will question the newness and utility or expediency of this term multimodality, which I think has interesting aspects, but I also think it's a little bit of a fad, and I'd like you to take it with care and know when to use it and how to use it. I think that's an interesting and a nice quote to get things rolling from Raymond Williams, the British sociologist and cultural theorist, writing in the 60s. No mode of production, and therefore no dominant social order, and therefore no dominant culture, in reality includes or exhausts all of human practice, human energy, or human intention. Why I chose that is because I think that multimodality is trying to reinvent ways of doing creative practice in research that have been in place, for at least 30 or 40 years. So, but let's see how we go. Also important in the workshop that maybe it's useful for you, depending on what you're doing and how you are approaching creative practice, is I like this quote by the Australian cultural theorist Mackenzie Wark. He's based in New York for many years at the New School for Social Research. And he says in that book, Molecular Red, published in 2015, disparate times call for disparate methods. So I think that for you doing PhD studies or just finished PhD studies, it's an interesting moment to experiment with methods, whether you want to use traditional methods, and there's nothing wrong with that, but there's been, over the last decade or so, a resurgence on experimenting and innovating with methods, which I think makes doing research these days quite interesting. And I also like the provocation that methods have a world-making capacities. They not only describe the world, many scientists like to think that their methods are objective ways of describing reality, and sometimes they are. But I also like to think of those other capacities of methods to create worlds, to create socialities and social realities. So if we take that provocation, then it means that methods are always political. They're not neutral. And I like to think that they are political, and that's why focusing on methods is important, and choosing the right methods are important if you believe or if you think that they're not necessarily neutral. And hence the question that arises, if they are not neutral, if they are political, and if they have a capacity to create a world, then what sort of social realities you want to create through your research. So these are just provocations to get you started. Now let's start with the stories, and I hope that they might be some interest to you. Maybe they're a little bit esoteric. So I'll invite you to travel back in time and also in space, and guess where that could be. It's not Mars yet. It could look like Mars by the end of the century, who knows. That's the Atacama Desert in northern Chile. I'm originally from Chile. I did my undergraduate in anthropology at the University of Chile, and then I did my master's in film studies here at Western Sydney University, and my PhD at the ICS. I finished in 2004. And I wanted to start with my undergraduate research because my concern or my interest in creative research was sparked very early on. And I've always made creative research the center of my research pursuit ever since then. This is a nitrate office, a saltpeter office. During the late 19th century and early 20th century, the Atacama Desert in northern Chile, which was before 1885, part of Peru and Bolivia. Then there was a 6-year war, and Chile won these territories because they are rich in minerals. Today, Chile is the #1 copper producer and exporter in the world, and one of the commercial links to China for its copper are very important. But during 100 years, the desert was dotted with these company towns, mostly run by English bankers, English companies. The English developed the railways and the ports and exported the nitrate to Europe. The agriculture in Europe was suffering, so they needed the nitrate for ramping up agriculture. So over 100 of these company towns were built, where the workers lived there, and they were paid in coins that could only be spent within the company town. So they couldn't, what the workers earned could not be spent, their wages could not be spent anywhere else but in the same company town. So there's been a lot of analysis about, capitalist forms of slavery in the 19th century. But what I was interesting was how this system not only introduced a new system of production, so it was the industrialization of the country, but also created a new system of social relations and produced a specific kind of cultural materiality, a material culture that was very particular to the time and the place. And I was using Michel Foucault's work. I was obnubilated by Michel Foucault in the early 90s, as many young students were at the time. And I was interested in the logic of the panoptic that Foucault developed in his work. Discipline and punishment, and how disciplinary power can be understood and operates at a variety of scales, from the level of buildings to the level of territories. So this context was very perfectly suited to do a Foucaultian analysis of how all social relations were controlled through space. So I did my undergraduate thesis in anthropology and historical archaeology in that topic. I spent a few months, about 6 months, doing ethnographic work. And this is another company town called Chacabuco, which in the 1970s was used by the military dictatorship of Pinochet as a concentration and torture camp. But it was built in the 1920s. And that's the theater. There was a lot of wealth in these company towns. The owners of the company towns that had links to the UK and the US used to bring artists, some of, like the Pavarottis of the time would be paid a lot of money. Most of the houses of the sort of upper classes were built from wood brought from Oregon in the US. There used to be a saying that champagne was cheaper than water. This is the driest place on earth. There's no water, there's no streams, there's no underground water. All the water had to be brought from the outside. And this was the theater for 1,000 people. And you can see it in the 1920s and now, the picture that I took, well, now in the 90s. And I remember they used to have a copy of Citizen Kane in 16mm, and I watched for the first time Citizen Kane by myself. This is the Orson Welles films in that theater, so it was a very surreal experience. To get to the point of it, the project was not just an undergraduate thesis, it was a creative project in collaboration with a visual artist called Ismael Frigerio, who was a Chilean returning from New York. He had spent about 10 years in New York, and Felipe Zavala, who was a filmmaker. And we did this visual installation, this audiovisual installation for the Museum of Fine Arts in 1999. So I finished the thesis in 96 and then developed it fully as a creative project, which was my intention. But as may be the case today still, the academic mainstream was really reluctant to accept a creative project in archaeology and anthropology in those days that was not an ethnographic film. So I had to develop the fully fledged project, and I was lucky that we got the most important museum in Chile to do the exhibition. So part of the narrative for the creative project was dissecting the body of the desert as kind of an anatomy. Just like the anatomist dissects a body of layers, we were dissecting the body of the desert in different layers of meaning. And we were working in a multimodal approach. So this is the catalog. And that's how the installation looked a little bit. So on the left of your screen, you have the paintings by the visual artist. So you had maps that were pressed into the canvas, and then he painted the objects that we collected. So I spoke about the material culture, the very specific material culture of these places. So he painted those objects that you can see physically on the other side of the room in those pedestals. And then they are through a CCTV circuit, they are projected electronically. So you have the objects in three modes, in canvas as a painting, the objects themselves in their physicality, and also in electronic form. And then in the middle was another room where you would walk in and you had 100 light boxes with photographs that we took. And then a video art exhibition where we were playing around with that idea of the wounds of capital industrialization on the body of the Atacama Desert, and playing with that idea. These are a little bit the examples of those objects that we were working from dead animals to what some of the women had in their private objects of desire, and also those flowers that the flowers wouldn't stand the heat and the dryness. So there's a full-fledged creation of those metallic flowers. So in the cemeteries, you see all these metallic flowers. Anyways, it's too long to explain, but I wanted to show you a little bit of an example of how it was the creative project that was driving much of the interest of the research, but also the impact of the research. The undergraduate thesis, as many of the theses, end up in a university library and can be accessed by people that are interested in the topic. But this installation was seen by thousands of people over the 3 months that was open. If we fast forward a couple of years, I started my PhD at Western Sydney, as I mentioned, in the year 2000. I first did my master's with Hart Cohen on film studies. I did a thesis and a film on Chilean cinema in exile. When the military dictatorship, during the military coup in '73 in Chile, the film industry was destroyed straight away, and thousands of people were exiled, and there was a national cinema built in exile for about 20 years. So that was my thesis, and I made a film about it. And then in the PhD, I worked with a range of Mapuche media activists. The Mapuche are the largest indigenous nation in Chile. There are about 1.5 million people, Mapuche people, or that identify as Mapuche people. The country has been undergoing, since the 1990s, since the return of democracy, a very fragile relationship with the Mapuche people in the south of the country. So opposite sides of the country to the previous project. At the moment, as we speak, the Mapuche nation, the country is called the Wallmapu, is under military exceptional, not sure how to say in English, exceptional circumstances. So it's been militarized. It's a very difficult situation of war between landowners that expropriated indigenous lands in the 19th century and during the military coup, and indigenous people that are trying to recover lands. These are lands not lost to the Spanish 500 years ago, but many of these were lands that were common land and then given to private owners in the 70s. So I wanted to look into more detail. My PhD was an examination of the ways that Mapuche media makers and activists were creating a counter media sphere from which to represent their stories, imagine their past, and propose their indigenous futures. So I was working with that concept of indigenous futures all the way back then, and how they were appropriating the media to tell experiences, but also expectations and visions. So the main research framework of the thesis was to understand that complex context of making Mapuche culture visible through media technologies. And the film is on Vimeo. It's called Land to Screen, De la Tierra a la Pantalla. It's a 37-minute film. And there was an interview that I did with my colleague from Humanities, Rachel Morley, that gives you a little bit more of context. So I can share this PowerPoint presentation with you if you're interested. And this is an important point where in 2003, when I was about to finish my PhD, which I finished in 2004, sorry, I should have said that I filmed the film. The woman on the left, her name is Janet Payan, and she's the most prominent Mapuche filmmaker, and she was making a film about Pehuenche people that had been relocated from the mountains, and because they wanted to build hydro dams. So I'm making a film about Janet making a film. So it had the whole film had an intertextual, to use Julia Kristeva's notion of intertextuality. So it was the two films were referencing each other, which was an interesting experiment in multimodal research and film production all the way back in 2002. I did my field work with my young daughter, my second daughter. She was 18 months, so for personal reasons, I had to do field work with her. So it was an interesting experience of having my 18-year-old daughter with me during film work. But I wanted to say that in 2003, Anna Everett and John Caldwell published a book called Theories and Practices of Digitextuality. And this is an example of a neologism that comes in, but no one takes up. I think I was the only scholar in the world to use the concept of digitextuality, and I published this work to explain a little bit the collaboration with these Mapuche activists. These were the years of new media. You know, maybe some of you are too young, but you might have studied this. In 2001, Lev Manovich publishes the book, The Language of New Media, and there's the concept of remediation. So digital media erupts. There's the eruption of digital media. This is before cell phones, but it's the internet, interactivity, all of that. So this is an example of how a term like multimodality is invented, but never takes up. But I thought it was interesting because it was referring to that concept of Julia Kristeva about digitextuality, how the digital practice and digital consumption, the digital allows for that intertextuality across different texts and products of media. And this is how I crafted my PhD with the film at the center. So I was very interested to make an intervention in Chilean politics. I didn't want to make a thesis that was going to be ended up in a university library written in English that no one in Chile could read. So I gave a lot of importance to the film, and you can see there the film at the center of the PhD project. The film was an experiment in what the Portuguese sociologist Boaventura de Sousa Santos has called a dialogue of knowledges between, an upper middle class academic in Australia and working class Indigenous woman like Janet. And the film had 4 main protagonists, which you see there in pink. Sofia Painequeo, which was an elder and cultural activist, which was experimenting with animation. Elias Payan, who was a radio producer and activist, and Janet Payan, that I mentioned before. She was making films in that river, where a lot of dams, and she was sharing her experiences of how the river would talk to her and guide her through the production process during production, filming, and editing of the film. And Alfredo Seguel, who was one of the first online journalists in the country and had one of the first Indigenous newspapers, online Indigenous newspapers. So on top of that, I constructed the theoretical framework, which had 4 basic elements. The notion of imperfect cinema from a Cuban theorist that talks about the Hollywood mode of production being the first cinema, the European and Soviet art cinema being the second cinema, and Latin America and Africa and Asia needed a third cinema, which had to be imperfect. If Hollywood aspired to perfection, this third cinema should aspire to be imperfect, working with non-professional actors, etc. And Clemencia Rodriguez is a Colombian theorist based in Philadelphia, and she coined the notion of citizens media. How do we enact our citizenships through media? So citizenship is not only something that you're granted by a state, but you can perform or enact a form of citizenship by the way you use the media. And Linda Tuhiwai-Smith is a Maori researcher who in 1999 published a book, Decolonizing Research, which was one of the first books in English to talk about decolonizing modes of practicing research. And finally, the work of American or US anthropologists of Indigenous media. So I was based on the work of Maori Kaupapa research. I adapted this model, and instead of seeking self-determination, I was looking at studying self-representation. So self-representation of Mapuche media makers at the center. Anyways, I'm going to run out of time, so I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the other Indigenous authors that I've been, working with since then. So I'll just jump into more current work, my work in Antarctica, which has been, if I had to summarize it, I'm interested in imagining Antarctica from the south. Antarctica has always been constructed discursively from the north as the anti-Arctic, and narratives of heroic eras, male, patriarchal, white forms up until recently. So I'm interested in how the Antarctic can be imagined and experienced from the south. How do we make Antarctica familiar, not just this white canvas of wilderness? How the Antarctic is being terraformed, is being made habitable, and how we can experiment with futures anthropologies and what I am calling the poetics of tomorrowing. And this is where I go back to the idea of methods as having the capacity to create worlds. So I'll come that into a minute. I did a project of digital storytelling first to get me to the Antarctic. I had been working with information and cultural exchange in Parramatta with young Cambodian, second generation Cambodians and first generation young African refugees. And then I made that film Nightfall on Gaia, which is available on Vimeo, which is a speculative film that is blending ethnography, documentary, science fiction. And then with Liam McGee and Marina Han and Andrea Polio, who were PhD students at ICS, we developed an online game. So this has been one of my core interests in the last 5 or 7 years, is to push the limits of social science research into the worlds of fiction and fabulation. And Donna Haraway has an interesting, the US theorist has an interesting provocation that she says the boundaries between science fiction and social realism is an optical illusion. So I really love that provocation and how science fiction allows us to think differently at the world now and at the present. So I've been writing and making films about that, and a little bit about, you know, doing ethnography in the Antarctic. And the film it has been shown in about 30 countries and many festivals. And I wanted to explore Antarctica as not only a natural laboratory for the scientists, it's not only the continent of science, but it's also a social laboratory for experimenting how human communities make themselves at home in extreme environments like this one. So I'm interested in what kind of social formations and socialities emerge from people working together, living together, what ways of placemaking happened. Also, Antarctica is being used as an analog for outer space, for thinking about modes of colonizing outer space. I don't like that word, but for the time being. And of thinking of documentary film, not only as a research tool, not only for the creative treatment of actuality, which was the first definition of documentary by John Grierson in the 1920s, but also documentary as the creative treatment of possibility, for anticipating and speculating about futures. So that's the tip of South America. This is where I was working with the Mapuche activists. You cannot see the Atacama Desert. This is Patagonia, that desert. It's a cold desert. These are the Malvinas Falkland Islands. This is Magellan Strait, Tierra del Fuego. This is the Drake Passage. And this is the Antarctic continent. This is the Antarctic Peninsula. And these islands are the South Shetland Islands, where I spent 4 summers. That's King George Island, that has the largest concentration of scientific stations. And I was stationed in one of them, in one of the Chilean stations. That's how the place looks like. So that's where I lived for, 2 weeks, 2 summers, 6 weeks, another summer. That's the view of it's not a town, it's a settlement. That's the research station. That's the view from my window. That's the hospital there, the post office, the supermarket. So I was doing, a traditional ethnography, visiting other stations. I spent time in the Chinese station, in the Korean station, the Argentinian station, in the Russian station, and also trying to see how the non-human world would have an impact on my research. My research was not only about humans, it was about the environment. And if we want to transform our research from researching about people to researching with people, how do we also use that provocation to researching with the non-human? So I was challenged all the time by what it means to be researching with ice, researching with penguins, researching with microbes, and how that not only ends up in a text, but ends up in a creative project such as the film. I spent a fair bit of time drinking Chinese beer with a Chinese scientist. That Chinese beer, Antarctica, is produced only in Antarctica. You cannot buy it anywhere else in the world, and it was pretty bad. I spent time with marine microbiologists that were looking for extremophiles, such as this. These are little animals that live in extreme conditions you can only see through microscopes. That's the Russian Orthodox Church, that it's a very important cultural icon for the Russian station. So this is the important part of the work. So I'm combining here, this is an early example of multimodality. So traditional ethnographic participant observation. I'm observing what the scientists are doing, what the scientists are talking about, what the logistics personnel do in their daily work. I did about 75 interviews. with a range of people: policy, tourists, scientists, carpenters, engineers from about 10 nationalities. Then I built the field note. The ethnographic field note became like a diary, but also diary in the Antarctic tradition. And then on top of that, I used Donna Haraway's notion of speculative fabulation, which she defines as a material and semiotic experiment. It's not just the words, it's not just the text, but also has a materiality. So I created a fictional character called Shuenun, who was a Maori astrobiologist. And Donna Haraway talks about the tight coupling of writing and research, where both terms require the factual, the fictional, and the fabulated to work. And both are materialized both in fiction and in scholarship. So while the research has had more traditional components, journal articles and all of that, books, the main product of this process has been this multimodal form of research, which has many outlets. The film is one, the digital stories are another, and the online game is another one. This is the fictional character that we constructed with the performance artist Victoria Hunt. She is a Maori performer. She comes from a long whakapapa Maori genealogy of navigators. She can trace her whakapapa or her genealogy to some of the first navigators that arrived, Maori navigators that arrived in Aotearoa. So in the film, she's a navigator. She's working for NASA, and she's preparing for the first human mission to the moon of Europa. So I looked at NASA roadmaps for sending crewed expeditions to the moon of Europa. The moon of Europa is one of the moons of Jupiter that is covered in ice, and in theory is one of the best candidates to harbor microbial life in the solar system. Hence why there's a lot of research in Antarctica doing that. So this was at the core of the experiment in speculative anthropological storytelling with a fabulated character. And now we are doing a sequel to the film with Victoria, and we're just starting another part of a creative process. So the film takes place in different temporalities as well, in 2043, in 2013, and somewhere in between. And I'm trying to work with how can we use research to refigure the imaginative possibilities of embodying a different structure of feeling of the Antarctic that is not just textual, historical, and intellectual or rational. This is a book that some of you may be interested. If you're interested in this, it's a little bit difficult to read, but I recommend it. It's by a Greek-British social theorist, Dimitris Papadopoulos, called Experimental Practice. And he also uses a lot of that experimental futuring methodologies of, he calls social science fiction, which I, will make, if we have time, we'll come back to it later. And a recent ARC linkage project with city councils and Antarctic programs. We developed, the premise was to turn the map of the world upside down, put Antarctica at the center. What happens? You have 5 cities that are surrounding the Antarctic, the Southern Ocean. These are called the gateway cities. They signed an agreement in 2009. And the project was working with the cities to see how the cities reimagine their urban identity, not only as gateways to the Antarctic, but as Antarctic custodial cities, as Antarctic stewards. So we were working with, again, Maori principles and indigenous principles of caring for country, and seeing how we can embrace those principles of land management for assisting the cities to create an urban imaginary of custodianship of the Antarctic. And together with Liam McGee, Marina Han, and Andrea Polio, whom you may know, we co-designed an online game. We developed a range of workshops, co-design workshops with young people in Christchurch, New Zealand, in Punta Arenas, Chile, in Hobart, but also in Cape Town, South Africa, and Ushuaia, Argentina. And basically, we used an article published by scientists in the journal Nature, where the scientists were anticipating what the Antarctic would look like in the year 2070, and with two scenarios: business as usual, and taking care of the planet. And those are the ones you see on the right. But you can see the difference between how scientists, communicate their information, and then what are the possibilities of doing multimodal cultural research and create an online game with young people. So the game, it's available online. I can send you the link as well. It's there at the top where it says Antarctic Futures. And we ended up co-writing 2 journal articles with the PhD students, with Marina and Andrea. So I was also multimodal research, creative research. Also, it's a new way of collaboration between academics and students or emerging researchers. So it was a good experience of creating multimodal research with the PhD students. And this is the one that Marina Han led for a very prestigious journal called First Monday, which was the first online journal, open access, peer-reviewed journal on the internet that's been around since the 90s. So I'll stop there for a minute. And just, I hope it was an interesting summary to get things started. And I'll now open up for some conversation or questions, or if you have comments or questions, or whether we want to talk a little bit about how you might consider working with multimodal forms. And we're going to look at more examples after the break. So I'd like to open it up to comments, questions, or if you want to experiment wildly with ideas of how you might want to put creative research at the center of your research, and how do you think that could go? Anyone?
Well, now that I've finished my PhD, or written it, I'm waiting for results back. I've been thinking about trying to turn it into a play and also into a fiction novel. So, yeah, that's sort of, maybe, I don't know how to go about it. It's in the thought stage, whereas how I can be inspired by what I produce and with my own background in policing to create a play, based on the results, basically, and alternatively a novel. I don't know. That's where I'm at, what I'm thinking. Yeah.
Okay. Hello, Kali. Nice to see you. You came in a bit late, so I'm not sure what you got out of that.
I got it. I got the whole
Okay.
thing. My apologies.
Okay.
Juan.
No problems.
Because I got homeschool and everything went into meltdown. I won't explain.
No problems. I know that you are very experienced in multimodal methodologies yourself. So it'd be great to hear from you at any point if you feel like, sharing your brilliant PhD work. Anyone else would like to make a comment or a question, or things that you found interesting or boring, or that you want to critique? Yinghua.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. Thank you, Juan. I was thinking that, so because my PhD is looking at Chinese female professionals, and I have like 21 amazing stories. And I wondered if there is any way to, I don't know, maybe turn that into like fictions or children's book. So like into picture book or something like that. But that's beyond the PhD. There's something probably happening afterwards. So my question is that when you work with creative kind of way of navigating research, how do I ask this question?
However you like.
Okay. So how can you make sure how do you convey the complexity of research into the, the other forms of presentation? For example, your film, like people will have different understanding towards your research, and the reaction won't be like the same. Like, how can you make sure your kind of idea will be accepted through these different kinds of forms? Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. I think, I don't speak the truth. That's why I wanted to show you a little bit how I have done it, because everyone has their own way of doing it, and that's how it has worked for me. Okay, so I'll start with a film that we did with Catherine Gibson and Isaac Line and Robert Nugent, who is here. He was the cinematographer, and if you don't know, Robert is one of the most accomplished filmmakers in Australia, so you should check his films. And Isaac was doing his PhD there in Cambodia. And when we were shooting the film, he kept asking me a similar question, Yinghua. It's like, how are we going to fit all the data of the PhD into the film? How are we going to capture the complexity of what I'm studying into the film? And you cannot do that. The different formats and the different modes have different purposes. So it's how you craft how all these formats are talking to each other is the beauty of the art. So the film is talking to a journal article, the journal article may be talking to a performance, maybe talking to a novel. So the work of crafting is, you're like the puppet master, and you are linking with strings all these multiple forms, and you need to, they all speak differently. That film, The Bamboo Bridge, was for people to feel that they could travel to Cambodia, admire this bamboo bridge for a minute, and just experience what it means, the materiality of that bamboo-made infrastructure. You could almost smell it. You could almost, you have a glimpse of the people that you don't read about in your PhD. When you talk about the people that you're working with, you just name them, or you just use a pseudonym if you're doing interviews. In the film, these people are alive. They tell their own stories through their own voices, which is quite different. A lot of people that watch my Antarctic film react in a similar way, is that I felt I traveled to the Antarctic. I even felt cold. I was so drawn by that fictional character that I thought she was real. I didn't mind whether she was fictional or real, right? So I think to respond is like, you cannot fit in all the data into a film, into an online game, into a performance, because there are different modes of communication experience. Yeah. So it's about how you craft the message across these multiple modes, hence that notion of multimodality. Yep. The message is not only in the medium, but across the media. So different parts of the message are embedded in the different projects. That's why I think that I experienced some of the same constraints that you are having. My PhD was a hybrid PhD, 50-50 exegesis, 50% the film. But as I mentioned before, the film was the core, because to respond also to Kathy, the creative project, unless you're working on your own, experimenting in your room, in your bathroom, and just creating images for yourself, but most of the time you're working collaborative with people. So the creative process is also driven by the people that you're working with, not only by yourself. So you can say, yeah, that's participatory action research, but to a point, because the end process of a participatory action research thesis still is a thesis that ends up in the library of the university that only a few people are going to read. Whereas the film, a theater play, or a novel is not only a product that more people can experience, but also there's a collaborative process that is quite different to the authorship of your thesis, you know? So I think that's the beauty also of creative modes of research, is that you need to let go a little bit of what you want to do and allow the people that you're working with to also construct, to be part of the process. In creative modes of research, I think that the process is as important as the product. So for your supervisors and for the academia, the end justify the means. You know, it doesn't matter what you do, just finish your bloody PhD thesis, submit it, become a PhD. But in creative work, I think that the process is as important, and the end does not justify the means, in my opinion. Every single project I've done since the 90s, I could ring the people and we're still good, in very close friends, because the energy put into the process was the most important thing. Obviously, the product is important. You want, you know, a polished film, you want a polished novel, you want a polished performance. I'm not questioning that. You want, you know, it to look as good as, and be, you know, as professional as possible, or, you know, fully professional. But that process of creation, I think, is very important. And that's why I love about creative research, that sometimes traditional research doesn't allow you to do, because it's textual based and you need to follow the canon of academic research that was developed, I guess, by the Greeks, you know, 2,500 years ago, and we still do it in one way or another. I hope I responded to your question, Yinghua, in why we're one way or another.
Okay, thank you so much.
Maybe, if I don't want to put you in the spot, Kali, but I know that you have a lot of experience with methodologies and, you know, experimental methodologies. Do you want to talk a little bit about your brilliant work that you're just about to finish?
You're so kind, Juan. But to be honest, like, I'm like, why have I come across, like, why am I sitting here now? Why was I not here like all those years ago with you in this conversation? And like, honestly, I'm like, because I just submitted and it's done now. Like, there's nothing to be changed. It's done.
Yep.
And I feel grief as well, because it's like, you know, what could the work be if it had like this incredible input, like in this conversation with you? What would it have been? But very early in my candidature, I had a conversation with a stranger who was an academic while I was breastfeeding my daughter in a cafe trying to write. And she said, sometimes it's really important to carve out your own, like, to be able to articulate your own work, your own path yourself. So I see that the whole journey, I feel like a lot of it was a big struggle for me, because understanding the creative aspects within a more conventional doctorate, because I didn't do a DCA, I did a DCR, can be very challenging, you know, for it to meet both purposes can be incredibly challenging. But I just want to say, it's just so incredibly inspiring. I have never, you know, it's the first time I've come across the concept of like your, you know, the multimodal cultural research. I just find it so incredibly inspiring and motivating, and it's incredible. So I will be going, I'll be on this whole journey exploring all beautiful work. But I have two questions.
Yep.
So incredibly, it's phenomenal. I think it's phenomenal, because what it takes to create that as a body of creative work is immense alone, let alone that it traverses both, you know, all of these different worlds at the same time. So my question is, how do you, as a creator and as, you know, and as an academic, like in these, across all of these roles, as a human being, how do you navigate all the possibilities that arise in these moments when it can go, you can, looking at the work, it's, you know, there's so much, it's so deep and complex. And how do you, as the human being, navigate all those possibilities that open? So it's a more kind of like, it's that question. And then my second question is, how do you navigate that process then with the research participants and their voices and involvement?
Yep, I think those are very important questions, Kelly. And I think, again, I don't speak the truth. I can only speak from my experience. The first question, I think, is an existential one. And I find writing really difficult. For me, the academic writing process is sometimes excruciating. I find it really difficult. Not just because it has a certain format, but it's not the way that I feel I can express fully, because I'm an emotional human being. So I trust, how you react in the world through emotions, not just the rational part. And most of the time, the academic writing is a rational exercise. So I feel a limitation. You're asking me, how do I react as a human being, right? So that's a first question, is that the creative process allows me to interact with the world, other people, but also the non-human world in a very different way, capturing a little bee through the camera and listening how it sounds, or, inventing a fictional character that is about to go to Jupiter in 2043. I think, are ways of connecting with the world differently. And the second question, I think it's a $1 million question, and it hasn't been resolved, but the research participants in your thesis, no matter how much participation, it doesn't matter how participatory your methodology is. It doesn't matter how much action research you're doing, or you're maybe following Paulo Freire's work to the detail. At the end of the day, you write your exegesis or your book yourself, and the people that you have been working with are just names in a piece of paper. So that's why I think the creative research allows you, as I was responding to Yinghua, a more deeper form of collaboration with the people that you are creating. You're creating a product. It's a film, it's an installation, it's a performance, it's a novel. Maybe the novel is a little bit different, Kathy, because at the end you still have that single author written aspect of it. So it could be a little bit different, the novel. I'm not sure. I've never written a novel, but with a play, with a film, with an installation, I think it opens up a different way of collaborating, by which the research participants become something more than research participants. They are part of the creation part of the research. They're not just participants. They become co-creators in a sense. Does it respond a little bit to your question, Kelly?
Yeah, and then within that is a complexity, because then, like, I can feel in my so that's the cover. I know you saw that before.
Yeah, you
so
look amazing. Yeah.
So that and that was one of the Indigenous artists. It was black and white, and she said no, it needs to be in full color. So I decided to aesthetically respond to that feedback, even though it came in very last minute, like just before the very end, like very late feedback. And I decided to follow her, like the aesthetic choices based on that dialogue rather than any other creative and that changed everything. But then it actually, because I wanted it to have like ethically, for it to be like to have the right, like for it to be responsive to that dialogue, was really important to me. And it completely has changed what that look is. And I just thought it was so, but there's so many conversations and I won't go into them, but it's like, that's for another day. But how then in the creative, so this is at the point now, there are participants that want to turn it into, want to be part of a collaborative creative work, because that was always an intention in my doctorate, but it got put aside because it got too hard to do as the doctorate, because I had different barriers that came up, including from my employer at the time.
Right.
So I pursued it as more a solo undertaking, like as it developed. But now is the possibility that it can turn into a creative work, because the momentum is there, not just in me, but in the community that it has been in dialogue with. So how do you now navigate that, and the copyright, the IP, like all of those things? The story, decisions, everything.
Yep. I see that Kathy has raised her hand, and I'm coming to you, Kathy, in a minute. Yeah. Great questions again. When I was doing my PhD, and I mentioned, I'm not sure if you were there, Kali, but the documentary film was the centerpiece of the research, because I wanted to make an intervention in the politics of my country. And I wanted the 4 Mapuche media makers to be able to use the research for themselves. None of the 4, they never read anything that I wrote about it. I sent them the PhD thesis, I sent them the articles, they said, okay, thank you. No one ever read a word. But they used the film for every occasion they had to promote their, projects, politics. They showed it in Spain, they showed it in the US, they showed it at the UN, they showed it in the festivals. So that cannot be done with just traditional textual projects, right? But there's a scene in that film towards the end where Janet Payan, the Mapuche filmmaker that I showed, she gets into a fight with the community. So she's coming from another community, and the elder from the community is telling her to piss off because she's not from the community, and she's trying to get them to denounce the hydroelectric company for abuse, and they're all scared of losing their jobs. So they ask her to leave. So I recorded all of that fight and I put it in the film. And Janet, when she saw it, she said, fuck it, you need to take that out of the film. You cannot put it in the film. So we had a lot of towing and froing for months. And we edited the scene together. So it was appropriate to show it in a way that she was happy with, but that captured the tension within Indigenous communities themselves. So that's a little bit how the person that you are saying reacted to the image in the cover of your PhD. So that means that you're not in a creative process, you're not working by yourself, for yourself, only for your product. It's a process that involves co-creation with others if you want, to be a shared co-created product. And the same with Victoria Hunt, the performance artist in my fictional film. I asked her let's build a character. So Xue Nun, Xue, there's a few Chinese speakers in this group. Xue means cold, ice, snow. And the Chinese ship is called the Xue Long, the snow dragon. So I like that Chinese word for capturing, sorry, my pronunciation, Xue, maybe it's not properly pronouncing. And Nun, and I said, I want you to embody a character that is not from anywhere, that the audience cannot tell if she's Chinese, Chilean, Maori, Australian, because I want to critique the nationalism in Antarctica. And she said to me, there's no way I can embody a character if I don't know where she comes from. She needs to have a story. And if I'm going to perform a character, that character needs a backstory. So she chose it to be a Maori astrobiologist. She chose that and I accepted it. And it was the best decision possible for that film, was that the character was a Maori astrobiologist and not just a random human that you couldn't tell where she comes from. So again, the creative process is a negotiation, and participatory action research sometimes is a negotiation and sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's just people are participating in your project, but it's not a negotiation. Kathy, one last question and then we'll have a break.
Just about, so when I started my PhD, I was doing it standard traditional PhD. It was only when I analysed the data that I saw that there could be a play or something like that. So the issue is that for the ethical reasons that when I had my participants participate, they were only participating for a particular research project. It was never envisioned that I'd want to. So I don't know if there's an ethical problem to use that data or snippets of that data, like their voices, in a play.
Classic question, Kathy, and the ethics in the universities are completely out of date, and they use the MRC in Australia, which are the ethics, as you know, developed by the medical professions, and they are meant to be there so that medical professionals do not abuse their patients in terms of confidentiality or blood samples or human samples or animals. But they're not adequate necessarily for creative research, as many of you doing creative work have almost given up on doing a PhD because of the ethics are difficult to pass. So I would say that the answer to that, Kathy, is on a case-by-case scenario. The problem with the ethics system in the university is that they apply the same canon to every project, and every project is an individual way of crafting a relationship with the people that you're working with. So they're not just numbers, they're not just patients giving blood, right? And there's a number to whoever donated blood. There's that process of co-creation of the final product that the ethics is not really capturing at the moment. So I'm sorry I don't have an answer on how you can incorporate the play, but I would be happy to have a look in detail about how you may be able to use the play. Is the play being already performed, or it's just written?
No. I haven't written the play because I've just written a standard PhD, and because it's about police women, and it's a bit like the Me Too movement. And Australian playwright David Williams wrote the play The Removalists, which is set in a police station and touches on sort of police brutality and corruption. And I could see how some of the characters some of the participants in my PhD could be molded into certain characters and produce, something that you would be able to get. You would be able to reach, your research would be able to reach more people than just the small academic field that it will.
Yeah, so there's 2 points or 2 sides to the same coin. One is the outreach, how it reaches more people, but also the creative process, how different it is, how it shapes the way that you do the research. So when you start adapting your PhD or doing a new research that incorporates a play, you start from a different perspective altogether. Your participants are not participants, they're collaborators. So I don't know how to negotiate the ethics of a performance group, but there's always a way to do it, to incorporate it. I wouldn't call it data, but the ethics applications will ask you to call it data. So I think we need to push against that canon as much as we can until the system gives and we're able to produce creative work within the academia. That's why I think multimodal is saying something important, although it's reinventing the wheel, as we're going to see in the second part. I think it's a pushback against academia for just asking everyone to do the same type of research and disallowing or disavowing other forms of experimental work. Yeah, even Australia Council for the Arts, the same. Let's take a break of 4 minutes, I suggest. So let's come back at 20 past or 21 past, and then we can do the second part and we'll have another chance for conversation. Okay?
Thanks.
Okay, I'm ready when you are. Sorry, there was a shorter break, but I want to finish it on time. I have a task to do at 4 before the storm comes. All right. Ready? Okay, so in this second part is shorter, and in the first I wanted to show you a little bit of the projects that I have been involved with that have the creative multimodal aspect at the center. Now I wanted to briefly touch on a few concepts and projects that other people are doing. So I'll start here. I mentioned this notion of digitextuality that these two US academics coined in 2003. And if maybe this is not your area of interest, but in the early 2000s, there was a lot of research in media studies and communication studies and politics around the emerging new media, you know, in terms like convergence, remediation, the language of new media and all of that. So a lot of the researchers and scholars were, you know, coming up with new terms, and this was one. And they talk about the need for new conceptual frameworks that open up theoretical terrains that are the result from incorporating innovating forms of digital media into the daily lives. Some of you may know that maybe the work of Sarah Pink in Melbourne, who has been doing this kind of work for about 20 years. And they basically, as I mentioned before, they used that concept by Julia Kristeva's intertextuality, which was quite popular in the 80s and 90s, to suggest a more precise trope capable at once of describing and constructing a sense-making function of the digital technology that was coming up with new interactive protocols, aesthetic features, transmedia interfaces. So it's a little bit technological determinism. You know, there's a whole of innovation in technology, and then social theories trying to catch up. So my question is whether the new term multimodality, it's also a little bit about that, but let's get into that in a minute. In 2011, there was an information scientist and artist from Canada called Matt Rattle. I don't know if he's still working or not, but I met him in a workshop in the UK once, and he was using the notion of critical making. So instead of critical theory and critical thinking, instead of critical thinking, he was using the notion of critical making. I haven't seen it, you know, explode in, you know, become too popular, but I thought was interesting, and he defined it as a mode of materially productive engagement that is intended to bridge the gap between the creative physical and the conceptual exploration of the project. And he says, it's borrowing a lot from, what design and art practice have been doing, for hundreds of years. But he says that the goal of these research events or creative events is primarily focused on using the making of things as an explicit practice for elaboration of the concepts. So if you're making a film or an installation, and the film is not necessarily a physical product anymore, as it used to be, you ended up, you were physically editing the images, cutting them, with scissors and gluing them together, stitching them together. It's not that anymore. But he's trying to put the focus on the material production of things, right, as an explicit part of conceptualization or elaboration of new concepts. So I think there's something valid there, but I'm not sure what the difference is between artistic practice. That's what artists do, with objects, like a sculpture or a painting. So I'm just giving you an overview of similar concepts. There's a design and art studio in London that I have collaborated with for many years, called Proboscis, based in London. And they have they're an independent artist-led creative studio, and they've been working since the early 2000s for about minded of their well-being. So whether they needed to take, a pill at a certain time of the day, or be aware of what they were eating, or being aware about, walking and doing exercise. So the project was about how people are aware or not about their well-being in their daily lives. So they're experimented by creating these life charms that people would carry in their pockets as a kind of reminder. But then the project grew, and they are collaborating with the British Antarctic Survey, which is the British Antarctic Science Division. And they have been developing modes of embodying large data sets from Antarctic scientists into these 3D printed shells. So I'm not sure how technically they do it. I'm really sorry, I'm not really technically well versed in this area of sort of high-tech art, but I know that they have been exploring with these techniques for identifying and extracting salient features from extremely large data sets using machine learning methods. And they intend to do this for processes by which they use climate data to drive the generation of the 3D forms. So again, the idea of critical making, you're materializing data. So data is not in a cloud, data is not necessarily in a film that exists digitally, but the data and the research incorporates these material forms that are also for a different way of public engagement. And there's another notion. So we're talking about digitextuality and critical making, and this is another one, creative mediation. Again, two UK authors, Sarah Kember and Joanna Zielinska. They are from Goldsmiths College, University of London. But Sarah is also a novelist, if you are interested to know. And Joanna is a photographer. So they bring creative practice into their scholarly work. Now, just like Anna Everett was saying in 2003 with digitextuality, they say the same. There's a need to move beyond the fascination and the fear of new media. and the belief in their alleged newness. So every time there's a new technology, everyone is either fearful or fully fascinated by what the new media may bring about. So they're saying, why don't we, move beyond that binary way of understanding media and technology? And they want to call attention to the complexities that arise in the processes of, making media or making research, but also the interactions and the encounters with media and with people that confound ways of interpreting the media objects. And what's interesting is that, as you know, there's a lot of new research in AI, machine learning, automation. You may have read or be interested by 2040, the biology of the human will be obsolete. I don't want to think in those terms. But in that book, they talk about scientist artistic interfaces in the Hadron Collider project. They talk about smart homes, advances in facial reconstructive surgery, ethical issues concerning the media, like internet privacy or gene modification. So they take the question of mediation from the media technologies to the biological. This is where I think it gets a bit interesting. That they say that life itself, under certain circumstances, becomes articulated as a medium that is subject to the same mechanisms of reproduction, transformation, flattening, and patenting that other medium forms like CDs, video, cassettes, chemically printed photographs, and so on underwent previously. If life itself, I'm just quoting from the book, if life itself is to be perceived as, or more accurately, reduced to a medium, we need to critically examine the complex and dynamic processes of mediation that are in operation at the biological, social, and political levels in the world, while also remaining aware of the limitations of the standalone human we that can provide such a rational critique. So what they're interested is in that blurring of the boundaries between the biological and the technological in the production of media and creative research. So I think there's something interesting there if you're interested in technology. I'm less interested in technology, but I think it's it is a notion that has had some kind of has generated some ripples in some areas. And Joanna Zielinska, I mentioned she's a photographer, and she has been doing some work around non-human creation and developing how to develop film and photography by non-humans. And she says, I'm quoting from that article in Russian, today in the age of drone media, satellite cameras and mobile phones enhanced with artificial intelligence, image making is increasingly decoupled from human agency and human vision. Imaging devices driven by machine learning and big data can also literally show us the end of the world. This talk, that's the talk that she's giving there, will argue that the return of androids, robots, and cyborgs and the renewed interest in artificial intelligence from researchers and investors is an indirect response to climate change, the depletion of Earth's resources, and the extinction crisis. In other words, the end of the world as we know it. She says that this is literally an attempt to design ourselves out of the planetary crisis named by scientists as the Anthropocene. So this is a bit different to the other part of this workshop, but I wanted to show you how these concepts have been used a lot in research that is into high-tech technology. I don't know if you've seen this film. It's available on YouTube called Sunspring. Anyone has seen it? So it's a 2016 experimental science fiction short film entirely written by an artificial intelligence bot. So it was not written by a human, it was written by a bot using neural networks, and it was conceived by a filmmaker. His name is Oscar Sharp, and by a New York University artificial intelligence researcher called Ross Goodwin. And the film is not that good, as you may anticipate, but it's interesting experiment. So it has three people named H, H2, and C. And it tries to be a love triangle, but it's interesting how the script of the film was authored by a recurrent neural network that they called long short-term memory, and by a bot named Benjamin. So creative mediation is a concept that has been applied in this realm of creation and research into technology. But my interest lies more in nature, in the ecological, in working with non-human nature, rivers, insects, and stuff like that. So I just finished a very modest short film about permaculture. I did a permaculture design course in March, and I did a very modest film about it. But I wanted to bring to this workshop one of the most interesting multimodal researchers that I know currently working in Australia, and her name is Leah Barkley, and some of you may know her. She's based in Queensland, and she's a sound artist, but also an ecologist. And this is a project she did about 5 years ago called River Listening. And all her projects are sound-based, and up to now, everything that I have showed you is pretty much visual, right? Films, photographs, even the critical making objects that you can touch and see, but not necessarily hear. So I think there's something quite innovative, and it is not now. Sound has always been a really interesting realm because of how humans we appreciate or not sound. And sound theory in art and in film, it's a really interesting aspect. And in this project, River Listening, she's interested about freshwater diversity. But all her projects have a very interesting balance between community engagement, participating with community, with scientists, and sound art. So if you're interested in multimodal forms of research across art and science, I really suggest that you check her website at the, I think she's at the University of Sunshine Coast now. She used to be at Griffith. Anyone knows the work of Leah Barkley? Yep, Robert, do you want to say anything about her work? How do you find her work?
I saw her work at the and met her at the Australian Anthropological Society in Sydney. Well, I think you were there as well.
No.
Conference a few years ago.
Okay.
Yeah, it's brilliant stuff, walking around and engaging with using mobile technology and binaural soundscapes. And she's an interesting person. Yeah.
So she's collaborating a lot with scientists that communicate the results through data, through charts, and it's a way of resisting or working differently to the epistemic authority of science and the STEM disciplines. And she's put art at the same level of the STEM disciplines in terms of not only communicating results, but in engaging with the non-human in a very different way through her concept of aquatic bioacoustics. So I recommend her work as an interesting one. And let's finish with the title of the talk. So all of that preamble was for you to read what some of the US anthropologists, again, are trying to reinvent the wheel. So Samuel Collins, who is a really nice guy, I've met him in a few occasions. He has written about science fiction and anthropology and science fiction. He was one of the ones to call attention to how anthropology and research in general should turn into a multimodal form of knowledge production. But as we have tried to summarize in this talk, you know, I have been working in such a way, and plenty of artists and academics have been working in that way in 100 years. So I want to know what's new. That's how they define it, as a visual, oral, inventive, artistic, and experimental practice that takes place within and beyond the academy. Multimodal research calls for new scholarship and pedagogical languages and practices to support its flourishing. They call it a vibrant mode of a new vibrant mode of scholarship. I think you already have been doing that for some time. And I think it's a way that the American academia has been late to catch up to what Australia has been doing for already 20 years. Australia and the UK were one of the first countries to experiment with hybrid PhDs. And the US was much more traditional in that sense. So I think this concept of multimodal anthropology, in a sense, is the American academia catching up to what has been happening in other parts of the world. However, what are some of the constraints of the things that we're trying to do? You pointed out a few. You know, ethics is one, how ethics is constructed. And Kali was reminding us that even the Art Council uses the NHMRC ethics definitions, but also the constraints discouraged by most academic publishers from bearing the cost of developing infrastructures to support alternative formats. So even if you finish with the creative project, you'll find a challenge in the scholarly infrastructures. How do they support that? There's a new journal that you may be interested called Media Plus Environment, like Media and Design Plus Environment, published by the University of California Press. And they are a very interesting new journal where they're publishing a lot of multimodal research. So they're not just interested in research articles, but in sound experiments, photography experiments, performance experiments, and other forms of knowledge production. So if you're interested in, if you're working across media and environment, it could be an interesting outlet for you to experiment with those. So although the context is changing and there's outlets opening, and especially younger generations of early career researchers are much more interested in doing this than the old guard. They talk, Collins, Durrington, and Gill talk about opportunities for reframing disciplinary canons. So we talked about that. Foregrounding scholarship that does not fit into the feature-length documentary convention or the novel, or scholarship that is authored from the margin and celebrates diverse experiences. So we've talked about that, and there's nothing new. They think that multimodal anthropology is a commitment to decolonize the archive with the explicit goal of disrupting how we define and cite the visual in research canon. They think it's a way of confronting disciplinary doxa that demands the publication of articles in high-ranking journals and the production of monographs as a precondition for obtaining tenure. So you can see the expediency and the utility of the concept is very narrow to how American anthropologists want to position themselves within the academia. But why I wanted to bring this to this workshop is because I think the concept of multimodal research can be further developed by people like you in the ICS. I think it's a concept that could be deepened, that could be made much more interesting than the way it has been used by American anthropologists. And that's why I wanted to bring it today as a kind of a inspiration or incitement for maybe some of you to work on a definition of what multimodal cultural research might be, bearing in mind that neologisms have been invented, you know, all the time, and some of them have a currency and others have not. There's an interesting book called Experimental Ethnography by the Costa Rican anthropologist Andrea Ballesteros, who will be talking at Western Sydney University in 2 weeks for the water event during Research Week. And in that book, there is an interesting article by Patricia Alvarez talking about, called the tactile analytics, touching as a collective act. And I think it's interesting how she uses the notion of the multimodal or the multimodal approach. She says it allows her to take advantage of the specificities of diverse mediums in order to engage her research material differently, including learning to listen with her skin. And she says that multimodal approaches expand the purview of research by de-emphasizing the centrality of a finished product. So we have talked about that. De-emphasizing the centrality of a finished product, like the exegesis itself, and emphasizing the process. But there's still, some work to be done in how the canon accepts all that, including the universities. Elizabeth Chin has the Laboratory for Speculative Ethnography, where they mix design and anthropology, and they have been doing a lot of interesting work, especially with performance. And the Hemispheric Institute of Performance and Politics is another link that I put there in case you wanted to explore something else. So those are some other examples that I think are trying to interrupt traditional ways of doing research by using those concepts: digitextuality, critical making, creative mediation, and multimodal research. So that's all I have for today, dear colleagues, appreciated colleagues. We have 15 minutes, 10 minutes for comments, final remarks, complaints, disgruntled listeners.
I have a complaint.
Yes, Ingwa.
I have a complaint. Like Kelly said, why we didn't know this beforehand, like when we first started. Like, it's lucky for Boya.
Well, you're so young, Ingwa, that it's never late. So it's not about what you couldn't do, which is a shame, but how you might be able to recalibrate your research in a different way. I think we need to be also conscious and respectful that doing art is difficult. Being a filmmaker, an artist, a performance artist is not just because you want to do it, you can do it. I have in the last few years received a lot of emails from students saying, I'm doing a research about, I don't know, transgenerational politics with refugees in Perth, and I want to make a film, but I know nothing about how to make a film. Can you help me? I don't think that's the way forward. I think one needs to be respectful for art practice. Art practices need time, dedication, inspiration, and a cultivation. You need to cultivate, whether it's music, film, installation. It doesn't just happen by magic. So it's another process that I think is difficult as well. So hopefully in the future, we can see research as embracing creative multimodal research as part of the canon, or as becoming a new form of doing research that is going to inspire new generations of researchers. If we don't do that way, I think the academic model has the challenge of becoming obsolete and insignificant soon. That's my fear, especially for ECRs like yourself, is that if we don't transform academia from within, it will be obsolete, within the next 20 years, because everyone else will be producing knowledge in more important and interesting ways than academics are doing, whether you are working for a business, developing technology, or you are a practicing artist. Unless we embrace a new form of doing research, I think we risk becoming obsolete, in my opinion. Don't quote me on that one. Don't say to your supervisors that I said that, because some of them will get angry at me. But that's how I feel. We need to reinvent ways of doing academic work.
Actually, Juan, thank you so much. And also for today's workshop, I think I learned a lot. I actually have one question regarding the language you use. So like we are talking about decolonize the ideas, right? But when you use the language, it's still in English. So how about other languages?
Yeah.
Like, so that's another question I have in my mind. Like,
Okay.
in order to be widely accepted, the
Yeah.
language is written in English.
Yeah, you're spot on, Yinghua. Kali and Jan, I know that you have a question, so we'll finish with Kali and Jan, but first Yinghua. Yes, that's a brilliant question, and I'm happy that you raised it. I'm really tired of doing work in English, and no offense at all. I love the English language, and I have an English part of me. But because I have developed most of my research in English, I have neglected doing work in Spanish. And I was reading that 1 in 3 academic papers in the world is published in English, and the whole academic networks are mostly in English. There's exceptions, you know, China and Brazil are exceptions, but there are worlds in themselves. So you're a Brazilian researcher, a Chinese researcher working inside Brazil or inside China, and you read each other. So I think, yeah, and decolonizing, it's an interesting word, because I think it's becoming, I think we're abusing the notion of decolonization at the moment. It has become another fad. I think it's important, obviously, but decolonization needs to be tied in with physical reparation. Decolonization cannot be just a metaphor. It's not a metaphor. It needs to be linked to a physical process of reparation of indigenous people or non-Western people. It cannot be just a metaphor that we can decolonize everything. So it's not just about decolonizing the language. It needs to be linked to a political process of reparation of the well-being, historical reparation of people that have suffered under colonialism, in my view. And I think we're abusing the term decolonizing to render it almost meaningless by just a metaphor. You know, we decolonizing the screen, decolonizing the university, decolonizing everything, and that we risk it just becoming a lousy metaphor. No worries, Osnur. Teşekkürler. My two horrible pronunciation words in Turkish: hello and goodbye.
No, you pronounce it really well. I forgot how to say it in Spanish. Sorry.
Yeah, it's okay. I love Turkish language; such a beautiful language.
I love Spanish language as well.
I find it so difficult.
Bye. See you.
Yeah, like Chinese, I find it so difficult. Yeah, Japanese is easier for Spanish speakers because the vowels are the same, a, e, I, o, u, but in Chinese, impossible. Kali and Jan, you had the final questions to wrap up.
Oh, that's just so, just what you're saying just now, this is not my question, but what you're just saying now is just so like that. It was kind of occurring to me as you were talking earlier, just this interaction today actually has an impact on that work that I'm doing, like where it goes. It actually helps create the focus. I think like my work's got like an activism in it, yep. But what you're talking about now actually really helps, like in this dialogue, has opened me up to looking more at how to actually go about linking it to that process of physical repair. That's just such an amazing, like it's mind-blowing where that can go. Juan, it's like incredible.
Excellent. Thank you, Kali. That was what I was trying to do in my PhD, is that the film would be a small token, a physical object that talks about decolonization, not in a metaphorical way, but that's an object that people can use, Mapuche activists could use, to repair at least historical misrepresentations in the mainstream media, and they could have that modest film to show their plight, their work. So yeah, it's I'm very thankful that that has resonated with you, Kali. Thank you.
Yeah, it's like a shift of a few degrees that makes
Yeah.
a massive, like if you're talking about complexity, the few degrees that creates a huge change. That's
Yeah.
that few degrees could be a whole different trajectory, you know.
Yeah, and just to be clear, I think that art for the sake of art and research for the sake of research, you know, might still be valid. I don't think it's not valid. The problem is when they become the canon, and other ways of doing multimodal creative research are not possible because art for the sake of art and academic research for the sake of academic research fill the whole space. Yeah, so I'm trying to find that other space that also deserves to, you know, to have a place. Jan, do you want to finish up?
To say one more thing.
Yeah.
My question is there a way to keep this conversation going? It's like so amazing. Like, is there some way? I don't know.
Yeah, I would be happy to. No problems. Let's talk to Dennis and to Lika and to Jan, and see whether we can do, you know, a second part of it. If you want to present your projects, I think I would be happy to, you know, organize a collective, and you can develop your projects. Yeah, happy to do that. Thank you, Kali. Let's talk to Dennis about it. Jan?
Okay. Hi, Juan. Thanks for your presentation, which has given me a very new understanding of research method, especially in relation to transnational and new medium platform. Actually, in my research, I used the photo voice in my method. I think it's also a kind of visual ethnography methodology, but I'm very confused about the analysis of the data. You know, because I'm still in the field work, but I almost finished in November. So because I adopted three methods: interview and participant observation and the photo voice. So at this currently stage, I have the recording from interview and the participants observation. But you know, the videos and the radios can also transcript as a scripter. So I can use traditional way like Vivo to analysis the text. But how to deal with the imaging data, I have a little bit confused. And I suppose my vision is just use this imaging to complete or supplement the previous two method data like transcript. But maybe you have some new idea to try to deal with or analysis this video or imaging data. This is my first question. And the second question, or maybe after you answer, and I'll continue my second question.
Yeah. I think we don't have time to look into it now, but there's an anthropologist whose work you might find interesting. Her name is Karen Waltorp. I can send you the name. And she has a chapter in that book that I mentioned where she describes her process of working with photo media. And she describes like the process. First I do this, then I do that, then I do that. So I think it could be useful for you just to read it. I'll send you the reference. Karen Waltorp. She's I think she's from the Netherlands or Danish maybe, or I don't know where she's from. European.
Okay, that will be great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
And my next question is not about the research. It's just another question. I'm very curious. I really like the documentary or film research more vividly and real than compared to the normal like publication journal articles. But as you said, it needs a team. Like I don't know how to shoot. I don't know how to put the camera, take the size, but I have to find the people to do related things, editing or other poster subtitles. So all kind of problem. So I just want to ask, it will cost a lot of money because compared to the publishing a paper to a journal or publishing a book, the traditional way. I think maybe in the future, one of us, maybe our project, want to do some like a documentary or film. I don't know how cost for all this kind of the things. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. That's a very important question. Creative research could be much more expensive than just writing, which the cost is, quite minimal. So I think it's a very good question. For my project, I did it all myself, but because I had a little bit of training in film theory and practice, so the process of making that film, which is a very imperfect film, in the sense that technically it's not that proficient, but the film that we did with Robert Nugent had a cost of about $100,000. So that blows up your PhD budget by about 10 times. And the modest film that I did now on permaculture had a cost of about $10,000. So that's the cheapest you can go, and that means that no one got paid except for the editor. So it's a very important point, Jan. Thank you for raising it. That we cannot forget. Now, anyways, we run out of time. Let's continue this on another time. It's already 4 o'clock, so let's continue this. I would be happy to continue this conversation in another workshop. No problems at all. Count me in.